Today we'll be covering John Lothrop Motley, an author and diplomat. Motley was born on April 15th, 1814, in Dorchester, Massachusetts, to his father Thomas Motley and his mother Anna Lothrop. His father Thomas, along with his uncle Edward, served mercantile apprenticeships in Portland. Thomas was apprenticed to James Deering on the Long Wharf, which is a pier, and Edward was apprenticed to Hugh McClelland, who owned a counting house in 4th Street. Both focused on the trade in Liverpool, in which one ship sailed or arrived a week. These goods were then sent to Boston to be sold on commission. In 1802, Thomas and Edward moved to Boston and established a commission house on India Wharf, one of the largest commercial wharves in the port. This became one of the largest commission houses in Boston, and it was named, after a while, Thomas and Edward Motley. It was here where Thomas met Anna Lothrop. Thomas, like most other successful merchants of the time period, devoted a lot of his wealth on the education of his children. John Motley spent his childhood in Dedham, a town in southwest Boston. He attended the Round Hill School and Boston Latin School. He also graduated from Harvard in 1831. During his schooling, along with the normal curriculum, Motley also learnt German and studied literature. He completed these studies in Göttingen in 1832 and 33, during which he became close friends with Otto von Bismarck. In 1839, Motley wrote a book called Morton's Hope, or The Memoirs of a Provincial, about life in a German university. In it, he describes Bismarck as a reckless and dashing eccentric, but also as an extremely gifted and charming young man. After his time in Göttingen, Motley and Bismarck studied civil law together at Frederick William University in Berlin. After a period of European travel, Motley returned in 1834 to America, where he continued his legal studies. In 1837, Motley married Mary Benjamin, a sister to the poet Park Benjamin. In 1841, Motley entered the US diplomatic service as a Secretary of Legation in St. Petersburg, but resigned after 3 months because, according to a letter he wrote to his mother, the climate was too harsh, the expenses of living there was too much, and his reserved habits. After returning to America, he entered definitively upon a career in literacy. Besides contributing historical and critical essays to the North American Review, such as Life and Character of Peter the Great in 1845, he was elected a member of the American Antiquarian Society in 1856. During this time, he wrote a second novel titled Mary Mount, A Romance of the Massachusetts Colony, based again upon the history of Thomas Morton. In 1846, Motley had begun to plan a history of the Netherlands, in particular the period of the United Provinces. He had already done vast amounts of research on the subject when, after finding his materials in the US inadequate, he went with his wife and children to Europe in 1851. For the next 5 years, he was at Dresden, Brussels, and The Hague in investigation of the archives, which resulted, in 1856, in the publication of The Rise of the Dutch Republic, which became very popular. It became so popular it was translated into Dutch, French, German, and Russian, and in 1860 Motley published the first 2 volumes of its continuation, The United Netherlands. This continuation was on a lot greater scale than the original, and it showed a lot more original research into the subject. It was brought to the truce of 1609 by 2 additional volumes published in 1867. The reception of Motley's work in the Netherlands was not very favourable, especially as Motley described the Dutch struggle for independence in a flattering light, which caused some to argue he was biased against their opponents. Although historians like the Orthodox Protestant Guillaume Groen van Prinsterer, whom Motley extensively quotes in his work, viewed him very favourably. Dutch historian Robert Fruin, who was inspired by Motley to do some of his own best work, and who had already reported in 1856 in the Westminster Review of Motley's edition of The Rise of the Dutch Republic, was critical of Motley's tendency to make up facts that are made for a good story. Though he admired Motley's gifts as an author and stated that he continued to hold the whole work in a high regard, he stressed it still required addition and correction. The humanist historian Johanna van Vleuten was very critical and responded to Freud in the introduction of his book that I cannot pronounce, published in 1860, about the proper appreciation of Motley's work is impossible because we can't build off his foundation, as he copied too much from Groen's archives and Garcard's correspondences, and for that his views are too obsolete to be used properly. Although von Vleuten did appreciate Motley's attempts to make Dutch history known among English-speaking audiences, he argues that Motley's lack of knowledge in the Dutch language prevented him from sharing the latest insights of the Dutch historiographers, and made him vulnerable to bias in favour of Protestants against the Catholics. In 1861, just after the outbreak of the American Civil War, Motley wrote 2 letters to the Times defending the federal position, and these letters were reprinted as a pamphlet entitled Causes of the Civil War in America, and it made a very favourable impression of President Lincoln. These pamphlets are seen as one of the main reasons why Europe didn't side with the Confederacy during the Civil War. In 1861, we know he lived in 31 Hertford Street in London, as an English census confirms that he was living with his wife and 2 daughters, and that he described himself as an author of history. Probably due to the essay he published, Motley was appointed US Minister to the Austrian Empire in 1861, a position he filled with distinction, working with other American diplomats such as John Bigelow and Charles Francis Adams to help prevent Europe's intervention on the side of the Confederacy in the Civil War. Motley resigned from his position as US's Minister to Austria in 1867, although 2 years later he was sent to represent his country as ambassador to the United Kingdom. But in November 1870, he was recalled by President Grant, as Motley had greatly angered him when he completely disregarded Secretary of State Hamilton Fish's carefully drafted orders regarding settlement of the Alabama claims. After a short visit to the Netherlands, Motley again went to live in England, where Life and Death of John Varneveld, advocate of Holland with a view of primary causes and movements of the 30 Years' War, appeared in 2 volumes in 1874. As he was getting older, ill health began to interfere with his life more and more, and he died in a Kingston Russell House near Dorchester, Dorset, leaving 3 daughters behind. He was buried at Kensal Green Cemetery in London, aged 63. As this is my first video, please tell me where I've gone wrong in the comments, because I know I've gone wrong everywhere, and I am sorry for the lack of pictures in half of it, when you're doing someone as, while not obscure, not as well known as John Motley. You don't have many pictures of the places he's been and the people around him.